How you doing, guys? Eric from willthewasteland.com. Been talking a lot about how there's going to be a collapse, but not going to be a collapse. And in that sense, what I mean is that there's going to be a breakdown of a lot of status quos, a lot of institutions, a lot of normal ways of doing things, but there isn't probably going to be a super serious major Mad Max, but that does not mean that we won't be put through some significant hardships over the next, however many years. And I think the best way to determine what is going to be most affected is by looking at those processes and institutions that are farthest from like the natural way that things work, farthest from, an equilibrium. The more government is involved in pulling these things away from how things should work and do work in reality, the more those are probably going to come snapping back, and those will see the biggest changes. One of those industries that we know is really messed up and is really takes a lot of government intervention to keep it operating at all is the medical industry. And right now, we're already seeing prices go through the roof after, over the last however many decades, and we're starting to see availability become an issue too. Working through the VA, you go to get an appointment, they give you one that's like 3 months out, and soon you're just not even be able to get appointments. I'm sure it's the same way with any sort of government, Medicare, Medicaid, that sort of thing too. And they're becoming wildly expensive. At the same time, we're having supply chain issues, and of course I've talked about how China produces a lot of these medicines and chemicals that we use in the medical industry, and that if those importations stop, then it's going to be really weird. Karl Denninger from the Market Ticker actually had a really great article about this recently called Surviving Medical Collapse, and he talks about why this is coming up, particularly when we have to face all these other sorts of economic issues, why the medical industry is going to be hit probably pretty hard. And he says CMS, Medicare, and Medicaid are already one third of the entire federal budget, and that's considered non-discretionary. A lot of times they'll throw stuff out there and they'll say discretionary spending, which sometimes even includes military, because you theoretically don't have to spend so much on military when we're not literally at war, but they don't consider Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security to be discretionary spending. So he continues, so they're already a third of the entire federal budget. When those programs were put into place, the tax rate for Medicare were approximately equal to the percentage of GDP spent on medical care. Makes sense. If you're spending, 5% of your GDP on medical care, it should be 5% of taxes, whatever. But the medical system then embarked on a multi-decade program of felony anti-competitive practices, and neither party has or will stop it. And to break away from that for a second, what a lot of people don't know is that the medical industry runs in such bizarre ways that are actually literally illegal if you were to do these sort of practices in any other sort of industry. If you have a mechanic shop or a used car dealership or some sort of restaurant, you literally cannot operate your business legally in the way that a lot of the medical industry does, in a lot of different ways. And it's insane, with pricing, with accounting, with all sorts of stuff like that. So he continues, so the percentage went from about 3 to 4% of GDP to roughly 20% of GDP today. The tax rate did not materially change and would have to be multiplied by 5 to be reasonably coherent, which of course is politically impossible. It's actually, I think, literally impossible because the tax rates are already more than 20% for a lot of people. So multiplying them by 5 would be over 100%. And he continues, I projected forward in the 1990s that this would bankrupt the federal government by about 2025, and when it did, Medicare and Medicaid would be unable to be funded. The pressure this would place on the medical system, since nobody would or will enforce the law, means that the ratchet job on everyone will continue and get worse, ending in an effective collapse. Whether that collapse is complete or partial does not matter. If you're the one who needs it and doesn't get it, statistical numbers are all fine and well but meaningless in the example of you. And his point is that it doesn't matter if you're saying, oh, well, the medical system didn't completely collapse, it's still here, if it takes you 6 or 8 months to get an appointment, if they can't give you antibiotics because China isn't shipping them and only 20-30% of the people are getting these services, then if you're not in that 20 or 30%, then you're shit out of luck. And when it comes to medical stuff, that's not good. He says, well, there are times when you can't avoid needing it. Obviously, a car crash is obviously one of them, but there are more. Nonetheless, knowing when you need it and when you don't is quite important, particularly when there is little supply. But, and this is what I was going to get into in this video, is that he writes most of the time you can avoid it. And A lot of the times you can't. There's things that just happen to you. But there are certain things that you can not only avoid by increasing your health, and like I did a video recently on supplements and things like that you can do to try to maintain some level of health. Physical fitness will make a big difference. And then doing things on your own to prepare for if you do need medical care and it isn't available in your normal venues, hospitals, whatever. Obviously, the most important one in my mind, and links to everything I'm talking about will be in the description as usual, but obviously the difference between healthcare of today and of 200 years ago, the biggest one is the availability of antibiotics to treat what used to be fatal infections and all sorts of ailments to now will become, for most people, an inconvenience. But if you don't have access to those antibiotics, those inconveniences go back to being fatal. And so, as usual, I talk about the Jase case, where you can get real doctor-prescribed antibiotics, not fish meds, and it comes with the instructions on how to use them. And with this little booklet, I'll put the link in the description to that. And this stuff will last for years, potentially even decades, with a slight loss in efficiency, just take a little bit more. But you certainly, for years, for a couple $100, you can have peace of mind knowing that if the medical system fails you, or even if the prices go way, way, way up, even if it's still available, that you won't die because of something stupid that would have been a non-issue 5 years ago. So definitely recommend that. I think for any serious preparedness-minded individual, it's almost, a no-brainer to have a stockpile of antibiotics in your stockpiles. Obviously, you want to include any other medicines that you take regularly, and then beyond that, you just have to start thinking about what are the type of things that I that I would be going to like an emergency room for that I might not be able to, or if I do, might become way, way more expensive. And things like obviously lacerations or cuts, you can get suture kit. You do need to practice with that, and obviously have things like alcohol, wound wash, and all the actual needles and actual thread. You can't just use sewing thread, you have to have actual sutures, and you definitely require some practice. For something that's not necessarily a massive gash and doesn't require the skill of suturing, you can get these wound closures, or even the I think it's Vetbond or Dermabond, which is like a super glue that veterinarians use, and you specifically designed for skin. It's not cheap. I'll put the link in that. But anything to close a wound that is beyond just a Band-Aid or a gauze pad or something, that you have an actual gash, but it's not quite to the level that you need surgery, but you need to close it up, things like that. And the Dermabond or Vetbond will work well for that, albeit they're not cheap, but it's a lot less expensive than if you wait and have some massive injury that result out of that. And then simple things for any sort of injury, like alcohol pads. Obviously for major cuts and stuff, you got your Quick Clot to prevent bleeding. And then you definitely want a bunch of gauze and bulky dressings and things like that, and athletic tape. I think it's JJ who's talking about the wound care buckets that he recommends, and how people don't think about, they think about stuff like, okay, at the moment of the injury, the Quick Clot, the wound wash, but they don't think about treating a wound that you survived. Like if you have an actual gunshot wound, even if it wasn't through your chest or whatever, like through an arm or a leg, or you passed through the meat somewhere that it wasn't life-threatening, that's weeks, of daily dressing change for the most part. And that takes a lot of stuff, like a lot of gauze, a lot of maybe hydrogen peroxide, a lot of athletic tape or ace bandage type stuff for one injury to actually treat the injury and keep it clean and dry and all that you would need to do. So you need quite a bit of that stuff. And luckily that stuff is not particularly expensive. It does take up some space, but it's good to buy it now, especially if it's something that's imported. Then you have your basic medicines. This stuff is already, stuff like cold medicine, it's already getting hard to find. Something simple like aspirin and ibuprofen and acetaminophen or Tylenol. Aspirin and Tylenol have purposes beyond just pain relief. Like acetaminophen, obviously, which is also included in meds like this, is a fever reducer. So that can be a big deal if you're getting to a dangerously high fever and you don't have access to hospital, or the wait's too long. You want to be able to do that at home. The aspirin can help prevent heart attacks or lessen the damage of it because it thins your blood out very quickly. And so things like that are very relatively inexpensive now, easy to get, could make a big difference when you don't have access to 911 or they're slow or they're super expensive or whatever. Another interesting little item that I got a while back was actually this set of, it's actually made for like clearing your pores and stuff like that, but these are perfect for, I don't even know what you would call these, but they're great for getting foreign objects of any kind out of your skin. So if you have splinters, bee stings, they have a little poker thing. If you need to lance a blister, you can sterilize this little skewer thing. So relatively cheap. Good thing to have on hand for just minor stuff like that, dealing with blistered splinters, like I said, or insect bites and things like that, where you have to kind of get in there and do something to your skin. And again, might become really expensive in the future, hard to get, great to have on hand. So that's just really basic stuff that you can do to, prevent a big chunk of the need of why you might need to go to the hospital or utilize the medical systems, especially the antibiotics. Obviously, there's no way you can eliminate your need for modern medicine and surgery and all sorts of other medicines that you might not need or might not know you need because you don't have that issue yet. And dental is a big one, trying to keep your dental hygiene up so that you don't have to deal with cavities and things like that are, for practical purposes, impossible to deal with on your own. Yeah, you can get stuff to pull teeth and whatever, but do you really want to have to do that? So hygiene and preventive medicine is best, because then when a problem does arise, you can try to deal with it or at least be comfortable throughout the process of waiting until you have medical care. Because like I said, I'm not anticipating a complete collapse of civilization, just a collapse of these bizarre mutated institutions as we have them today, which are, they succeed in spite of the way they're run, not because of it. They only succeed. Like the medical system in this country is an absolute mess and only quote unquote works or even functions because of the fact that we're currently prosperous. The government has a lot of, this fake money that it can throw into it, but it's massively, massively inefficient and run disastrously. So let me know what you guys think. If you have any other medical gear like that you think is a good idea to have on hand, and I'll talk to you soon.